Amazing note I got, and we'll get into the three stories here. This comes from Jen, who is a naturopathic MD. Dear Todd, I don't mean to tell you how to do your job, but I don't think that you're properly explaining wisdom nutrition. I have this in my office and suggest it for patients. This is something that fights inflammation, and as you've said, harnesses it for your own good, but it builds up in the body over time and prevents inflammation. This is one of the selling points I use with my clients. Also, the brewing process, the cold brew is not just about locking in the potency, it's locking in the quality. When you heat up a product like this, it doesn't just destroy the quality, it destroys the potency together. Those two things go together, Todd. Lastly, Dr. Jen Tempo is not just the inventor of this, many other things. Don't mean to tell you how to do your job, but I do recommend this for patients, and I take it myself. You can try this. It's an unbelievably potent blend of herbs, biblically inspired by Dr. Jen Tempo when he was in the Holy Land. So just go to trywisdomnow.com/Todd. There is no promo code. Trywisdomnow.com/Todd. When you stock up on this, you're going to get a 180-day money-back guarantee, which is pretty cool. At trywisdomnow.com/Todd, you're going to get 33% off, which is enormously cool. That's trywisdomnow.com/Todd. The Mockingbird media. I've been waiting for a long time for this to happen. They're finally beginning to realize they're dead. Now, they can be not reborn because only Jesus can do that, but they can be remade. They're going to have to be remade. Because when you get admissions like we're about to go through from people in the Mockingbird media who are now beginning to understand how bad it's gotten, people like Van Jones, and they're speaking out and admitting that they've lost any of their potency, this is huge. The people who run Kamala Harris recently admitted that they didn't see any reason at all to reach out to the Washington Post or the New York Times. And this admission, they're going back through and once again going with the postmortem and what happens and their President Trump and Russia and Putin. And why didn't you reach out to the Washington Post and New York Times, people asked? Because they're already in our corner. They're reliable supporters. There's no reason for us to spend time going there. Which then once again begs the question of why didn't you go to Joe Rogan's podcast? Joe invited you. All you had to do is pop on a plane and go to Austin and not demand that it be a 30-minute interview or whatever. They didn't do that because people who work for Kamala Harris were embarrassed to admit they'd gone to see Joe Rogan or that their principal appeared on Joe Rogan. So one hand, they're not going to reach out to the liberals. On the other hand, they're not going to reach out to Rogan, who is at best a libertarian. Maybe he's becoming conservative. When you look at the signs all around us in terms of the death of the Mockingbird media, it can come out in just things like this. This is Cheryl Atkinson writing. Tonight, the White House says it has collected and analyzed over 5,000 images reported to be drones or suspicious aircraft. That it knows some of them are manned. Many are indeed unmanned drones. Some are hobbyists, some commercial, and they're operating for the common good. You've done the hard work. Go ahead and release the analysis of the 5,000 images, please. Obviously, that should be public record since you work for us, we pay your salaries, and you're collecting the information on your behalf, and our behalf, and you're indicating there's nothing classified about what you're learning. I'll wait. Cheryl Atkinson, of course, a former member in good standing of the Mockingbird media, who had her computers and her family's computers hacked, probably by our nation. She's asking some simple questions that the Mockingbird media should be asking. Great, you say, so now show us. That's one example. Another is this. Jake Tapper, whose network this past weekend committed another act of open fraud, an openly constructed drama meant to appear to be news. In other words, what's that phrase President Trump had championed, invented? Fake news. That's one of the phrases I wasn't allowed to say in local radio back in the day. That was a firing offense. None of us were allowed to say fake news, nor were we ever to suggest that any news stories had ever been faked. Interestingly, that came about at a time where they were getting ready to fake a whole ton of news stories about people standing in line for a certain medication. No one was standing in line. This is Jake Tapper. He's in a glum mood because of a settlement reached in the ABC lawsuit. President Trump sued ABC because George Stephanopoulos said President Trump had been found liable of in the E. Jean Carroll case. That never happened.
We should note, Kristen, I don't want to overstate Trump's friendliness and genial attitude at this press conference, because this weekend ABC News agreed to pay $16 million, including legal fees, to settle a defamation lawsuit brought by Trump against the network and their anchor, George Stephanopoulos. And that obviously will not be the end of this campaign against the media, legal campaign against the media. We heard him go after many other news outlets today. Take a listen.
Well, I'm going to be bringing one against the people in Iowa, their newspaper. We're filing one on 60 Minutes. We're involved in one which has been going on for a while and very successfully against Bob Woodward. We have one, very interestingly, on Pulitzer, because reporters at the New York Times, Washington Post got Pulitzer Prizes for their wonderful, accurate, and highly professional reporting on the Russia hoax.
We don't have time to go into all of that, but just to touch.
No time to go into all that, but just to touch on that. Come and defend me, he says to his colleague.
Based on a couple. There's one of them is the people of Iowa, the Des Moines Register. That's because there was a poll that was inaccurate. Mm-hmm. The one on 60.
Jake, it's not because it was inaccurate. It's because it was doctored up. You know these things. So Jake Tapper doesn't yet know the Mockingbird media is dead, but he's an indicator of that. His colleague Van Jones does. We'll get to that in a second.
And it's because they didn't like the editing that had been done to the Kamala Harris.
From Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
They didn't like the editing. They replaced her answer with an answer she didn't give. That's not editing. That's not editing for time or space or clarity. It's the opposite. It's editing to add lack of clarity, to make her seem like she answered a question well that she didn't even really answer.
I mean, this is wildly ridiculous.
Well, one of the things to keep in mind here is that Donald Trump feels like he won. I mean, this weekend, by having a settlement with ABC, one that many people did not think was going to come to fruition. They thought that this would end up in court, or that it would certainly not be a settlement in which ABC paid $16 million and issued a public apology, which was part of this, has been a situation which has empowered and emboldened Donald Trump.
Praise God. And it's bizarre, Jake. Why? Your network is on a losing streak, and you're about to lose a case where you libeled a U.S. serviceman. You're about to lose that case. One of your defenses was, well, the Taliban says. You brought the Taliban in to defend you in court. I mean, not physically, but their versions of Sharia law. That's bizarre. If I'm not mistaken, well, I'm not. Networks paid out how much money to the young man in Washington, D.C., where the Native American activist came up drumming his face, Nicholas Sandmann? You're going to be paying to this young kid who showed up at a Kansas City Chiefs game. Part of his face was painted dark. The other was red, and you called him a racist because he was in blackface. That came out of the sports media. There has got to be a cost. Yes, President Trump is obviously a public persona, but public personas are human beings, and CNN has radically lied about him. CNN, that same network on which Jake Tapper sits, spent 56 minutes touting a very special exclusive report.
Deep in the belly of the regime's Air Force intelligence headquarters,
these are English letters.
We are hoping to find traces of Austin Tice, an American journalist held captive in Syria since 2012. It's one of many secret prisons across the city. This specific branch was tasked with surveillance, arrest, and killing of all regime critics.
These are all cleaned out.
We don't find any hints of Tice, but come across something extraordinary.
Yes.
I can't tell, though. It might just be a blanket. But it's the only cell that's locked. Is he gonna shoot it?
The guard makes us turn the camera off while he shoots the lock off the cell door.
Ooh, this is dramatic. It's really dramatic.
We go in to get a closer look. It's still not clear if there is something under the blanket.
Oh, I wonder if there is something under the blanket.
Is there someone there?
Hello? Is there someone there?
Is someone there?
Oh, I wonder if there's someone there. Gulp.
Hello?
Hello? Turned out there was someone there. And their exclusive report, they brought this man out into the sunlight for the first time. He'd been locked in a prison. And CNN special reporter Clarissa Ward was there to bring him outside with his perfectly clean hands and perfectly clean jacket and tightly trimmed hair and beard and clean teeth. A man who'd been in prison for how long in the dark looked straight up at the sun. It turned out that the man identified himself as Abel Gabral, said he lived in the central city of Syria for Homs. However, over the weekend, self-described Syrian fact-checking site Verify Asai said he's actually Salama Mohammed Salama, a.k.a. Abu Hamza, an infamous crew lieutenant in the Syrian Air Force intelligence. They faked that, and CNN has been forced to admit it. The Mockingbird media is waking up dead. That right there disqualifies Jake Tapper's critique of the ABC lawsuit because it shows his network still is happy to go out and stage fake news. Meanwhile, we have this, James O'Keefe. Now with O'Keefe Media Group, he's often accused of being the perpetrator of fake news. Okay, how's he do his work like the Mockingbird media used to do? He takes hidden cameras in and he talks to people who like to gab. Oftentimes, these are people who think they're on a same-sex attracted date or they're getting a job interview. This guy's name is Henry Appel. He's a national security advisor. Watch and or listen to this as James O'Keefe records the man.
Well, here's the tea. Joe Biden is dead. He can't say a sentence. He's really progressed in his old age. Everybody recognized. I can't believe it wasn't a bigger scandal. He'll be dead in a year.
Meet Henry Appel, an advisor for the National Security Council. Henry Appel shared that President Biden had called the NSC White House phone while on a foreign trip looking for NSC advisor Jake Sullivan. Henry told the president that, in fact, Mr. Sullivan was not at the White House, but on the same foreign trip as President Biden.
My boss was on an international trip with him, in Europe or something. The phone rang in the office, and I was like, "Oh, Mr. President, Henry." He was like, "He's safe there." He's like, "No, he's traveling with you. He's on the same trip."
CNN didn't have that story. James O'Keefe had that story. CNN had the fake news story, while James O'Keefe had a groundbreaking story, another one. The Mockingbird media is waking up and they're beginning to realize they're dead. Now, sometimes a biological entity will be dead and not know it, like the classic chicken with its head cut off. That actually does happen. It's so disturbing. If you've ever slaughtered chickens, you cut their heads off and they'll run around. They'll literally run around, and sometimes for a minute. Snakes are the same, man. You cut the head off a snake and that thing will squirm for a long time, couple of minutes, sometimes more. It can still wrap itself around your arm. Now, I am not wishing physical death or pain upon the people in the Mockingbird media. In fact, I'm wishing that they would look at this and say, Jake, you work at a network that just faked a story of a prisoner who actually turned out apparently to be one of the torturers. You should leave. If you're a journalist, you can't be at a network like that and be a journalist. You can't maintain any credibility. Van Jones at this point, I think still leftist operative, and by the way, a smart guy and a dangerous guy. Van Jones said, drop the radical shell to get the radical results, and he went and did that, cleaned up and went to CNN. He knows the legacy media, the Mockingbird media, is dead.
In the Philly suburbs, and I'm telling you, we are way off. The entire political class is way off. First of all,
he's speaking at the New York Times Deal Book Summit.
Digital is a new door knocking. Mm-hmm. You got to understand that. We were laughing our butts off at Donald Trump for suspending his door knocking campaign and letting Charlie Kirk and Elon do a bunch of stuff online. Mm-hmm. We said, these guys are idiots.
It wasn't just online. The online portion led to physical contact in person, turnout in person. Van Jones apparently doesn't know that.
You're stupid. Then you start knocking on these doors. You know what people come to the door with? Their phone in their hand. They're in a 24-hour digital surround sound that has nothing to do with CNN, has nothing to do with any stuff that we do. I asked I got a teenage son, I asked him, who are the most influential people in the world today?
You're not going to recognize any of these names. And this is important because it speaks to the power of digital and how dead the Mockingbird media really is. It's like the chicken running around doesn't realize its head's cut off. The next generation is so utterly divorced from the Mockingbird media. Listen to these names.
I'm thinking to myself, he's going to say Barack Obama, Oprah Winfrey, Jay-Z. He says...
Ben Jones has notes because he doesn't know these names either.
I sent Aiden Ross, Jinxie, and Sketch. I don't know who he's talking about.
And I'm looking at my younger producer, Alex, and he's nodding his head. He kind of knows who some of these people are.
What platforms are you on? He goes, I'm on Twitch, Kick, and Rumble. I said, that sounds like you need to go to the hospital. What are these platforms? I'm telling you guys, the mainstream has become fringe, and the fringe has become mainstream. There are platforms, there are people out there that are getting 14 million streams, and we're on cable news getting 1 or 2 million. And so there is a whole world out there. Kellyanne Conway, I hate to agree with her, but I do a lot of times. Donald Trump understood that and we didn't.
Donald Trump understands a lot of things that you didn't. Donald Trump sometimes comes across as a relative ruffian. I will never forget the heart attacks in the Mockingbird media when he said fake news. I'll never forget the meeting we had to take where a guy who was a really good guy, I love this guy very much, dear guy, he quit. He was a senior executive at the media company that ran my Seattle morning show. And he was forced to come along and say, you don't get to say fake news. And it looked like he was in a hostage video. I've been waiting a long time for this. So a note to the Mockingbird media, complete the death or get out of your circle of doom.